There was a time when marriage meant something exclusive, when emotional intimacy with someone outside your marriage was understood to be a form of betrayal, and when the phrase work spouse would have been recognized as exactly what it is, a dangerous rationalization for inappropriate boundaries. But what happened to Michael Bradford on Steve Harvey's show would prove that sometimes the most destructive affairs are the ones that never become physical, and that emotional infidelity can hollow out a marriage just as thoroughly as any other kind of betrayal. When this 47-year-old man stood before America and described how his wife's relationship with her work husband had gradually pushed him to the margins of her life, Steve Harvey delivered a response so direct and so validating that it changed the national conversation about what constitutes cheating in modern marriages. What happened next showed millions of viewers that you do not have to accept being replaced in your own marriage, and that protecting your relationship sometimes means demanding that your spouse choose between you and the person who is taking your place. If you believe that marriage requires boundaries, and that emotional intimacy belongs inside the relationship rather than outside it, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. What you are about to witness is a man who trusted his instincts despite being told he was overreacting, and the moment when someone finally validated that his concerns were not only reasonable but essential to protecting his marriage. Michael Bradford was 47 years old, a high school history teacher in Portland, Oregon, and a devoted father to two daughters aged 12 and 14. He had been married to his wife Jennifer for 16 years, and for most of that time, he had considered their marriage strong, built on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine friendship. They had navigated the challenges of raising children, balancing demanding careers, and maintaining their relationship through the normal stresses of middle-class family life. Michael had never imagined that their marriage would be threatened not by financial problems or major disagreements, but by a relationship Jennifer insisted was completely innocent. Michael had grown up in a traditional household in rural Montana, the son of parents who had been married for over 40 years and who had modeled clear boundaries in their own relationship. His father had worked construction and his mother had been a nurse, and both had maintained professional relationships that never crossed into the kind of emotional intimacy that belonged exclusively to their marriage. Michael had absorbed these values without questioning them, believing that marriage meant prioritizing your spouse above all other relationships, that certain kinds of closeness were reserved for your partner alone, and that protecting your marriage meant maintaining appropriate boundaries with everyone else. When Michael married Jennifer, a talented software engineer who worked for a major tech company, he had been proud of her intelligence and career success. Jennifer was passionate about her work, often putting in long hours on complex projects, and Michael had always supported her professional ambitions. He had taken on more responsibility for childcare and household management to accommodate her demanding schedule, viewing their marriage as a partnership where they each contributed in different ways to their family's well-being. The shift in their marriage had been so gradual that Michael struggled to identify exactly when it began. About 3 years before his appearance on Steve Harvey's show, Jennifer had been assigned to a new project team at work. She began mentioning a colleague named David with increasing frequency, referencing his opinions on various topics, sharing inside jokes from the office, and spending more time in work-related conversations and activities that included him. Initially, Michael paid little attention to these mentions, assuming Jennifer was simply excited about her new project and getting along well with her teammates. But over the following months, David's presence in their lives became impossible to ignore. Jennifer began texting constantly during evenings and weekends, always explaining that it was work-related communication with David about project details or deadlines. She started having regular coffee meetings with David before work and lunch meetings that often extended well beyond an hour. She attended after-work happy hours that she had previously avoided, always mentioning that David would be there. She began comparing Michael to David in ways that felt increasingly unfavorable, noting how David understood the challenges of her industry, how he appreciated her sense of humor, how he shared her perspective on various issues. Michael tried to express his discomfort with the amount of time and emotional energy Jennifer was investing in her relationship with David. Her response was immediate and dismissive. She claimed that Michael was being insecure and jealous, that David was just a work friend, that their relationship was completely platonic, and that Michael was trying to control who she could be friends with. She said the phrase that Michael would come to hate David is my work husband. It is totally normal. Everyone at the office has work spouses. It does not mean anything. But to Michael, it meant everything. He watched his wife invest time, attention, and emotional intimacy in another man while claiming it was innocent. He watched her light up when David texted, saw her eagerness to share news with David before she shared it with him, noticed that she dressed with more care on days when she knew she would see David. He felt himself becoming secondary in his own marriage, a provider of domestic stability and childcare, while David received Jennifer's best energy, her laughter, her engagement, and her emotional availability. Michael tried to research whether his concerns were valid or if he was indeed being unreasonably jealous as Jennifer claimed. What he discovered both validated his instincts and deepened his worry. He learned that emotional affairs often begin with exactly this kind of work-spouse dynamic, that the justification of it being just friendship allowed couples to cross boundaries they would never cross if they were honest about the intimacy developing. He read about how emotional affairs can be more damaging to marriages than physical ones because they involve sharing the emotional intimacy that should be reserved for a spouse, creating a bond that gradually replaces the marital relationship. He learned that common signs of emotional affairs included thinking about the person constantly, sharing personal information with them before sharing with your spouse, comparing your spouse unfavorably to them, hiding the extent of communication with them, and feeling defensive when questioned about the relationship. Jennifer exhibited every single one of these signs, yet she insisted vehemently that Michael was imagining a problem that did not exist. The situation escalated about 6 months before Michael's appearance on Steve Harvey's show. Jennifer had mentioned casually that David was going through a difficult divorce and needed emotional support. Suddenly, she was having even longer text conversations with him, offering to meet him for coffee when he was feeling down, and spending what felt to Michael like an enormous amount of energy on helping David process his feelings about his failing marriage. The irony was not lost on Michael that his wife was so invested in supporting another man through his divorce that she had no energy left to work on her own marriage. Michael tried once more to have a serious conversation with Jennifer about boundaries. He explained that regardless of whether the relationship was physical, the emotional intimacy she shared with David was taking something away from their marriage. He told her that being someone's primary emotional support and confidant was a role that should belong to a spouse, not a coworker. He asked her to consider how she would feel if he had a female colleague he texted constantly, met for regular coffee dates, compared her to favorably, and turned to for emotional support before turning to her. Jennifer's response was anger and accusations. She claimed Michael was trying to isolate her from her friends, that he was being controlling and insecure, that his jealousy was pushing her away, and that if he trusted her, he would not have a problem with her friendship with David. She refused to acknowledge that there was anything inappropriate about the relationship or that she needed to establish any different boundaries. She made Michael feel like he was the problem, like his discomfort with her emotional affair was a character flaw rather than a reasonable response to watching his wife develop an intimate relationship with another man. The impact on their marriage was undeniable. Jennifer and Michael had stopped having meaningful conversations because Jennifer was too busy texting David. Their physical intimacy had declined dramatically because Jennifer was emotionally exhausted from her relationship with David and had nothing left to give to Michael. They had stopped doing activities together as a couple because Jennifer preferred to spend her free time in work-related social events where David would be present. Their daughters had begun commenting that mom was always on her phone and that dad seemed sad all the time. Michael felt invisible in his own home. He was taking care of the majority of parenting responsibilities, managing the household, teaching full-time, and trying to maintain some connection with a wife who was emotionally invested in another man. He felt like he was competing for his own wife's attention and losing to someone who got to be the fun, exciting part of her life while Michael handled the mundane realities of marriage and family. The final straw came when Michael discovered that Jennifer had been deleting text messages with David, something she admitted to when confronted, but claimed she did only because Michael reacted so badly whenever David was mentioned. She saw nothing wrong with hiding communication with David to avoid Michael's supposedly unreasonable jealousy, but to Michael, the deleted messages proved that Jennifer knew on some level that her relationship with David crossed boundaries, or she would not feel the need to hide evidence of it. Michael realized he was at a crossroads. He could continue accepting a marriage where he was emotionally sidelined while his wife maintained what was clearly an emotional affair with her coworker, or he could demand that Jennifer acknowledge the problem and make real changes to protect their marriage. But every time he tried to have that conversation, Jennifer made him feel like he was being ridiculous, controlling, and jealous. He had started to doubt his own perceptions, to wonder if maybe he was overreacting and work spouses really were harmless despite everything he felt and observed suggesting otherwise. ACT 3. THESTRGGLE 4 12 minutes. The 6 months following Michael's discovery that Jennifer was deleting messages with David were marked by escalating tension and emotional distance in their marriage. Michael found himself withdrawing from Jennifer, unable to maintain the pretense that everything was fine when he felt so completely replaced in her emotional life. He focused on his daughters and his teaching, pouring his energy into the parts of his life where he felt valued and needed. But the loneliness of being married to someone who was emotionally unavailable was crushing him. Jennifer seemed oblivious to Michael's withdrawal or perhaps relieved by it. With Michael no longer regularly confronting her about David, she appeared to feel free to invest even more openly in that relationship. She began mentioning weekend work sessions with David, explaining that they had deadlines to meet and needed uninterrupted time to collaborate. Michael suspected these sessions involved far more personal conversation than actual work, but felt powerless to object without being accused of being controlling. Michael's daughters were old enough to sense that something was fundamentally wrong in their parents' marriage. His older daughter asked him directly one evening if he and Mom were going to get divorced. The question hit Michael like a physical blow. He had been so focused on trying to preserve his marriage that he had not fully considered what message he and Jennifer were sending their daughters about relationships. They were teaching their girls that wives could have intimate emotional relationships with men other than their husbands, and that husbands should accept being secondary in their own marriages. Was that really the model he wanted to provide? Michael confided in his brother Tom, who lived across the country in Montana. Tom listened to the full story and responded with blunt clarity that Michael desperately needed to hear. He told Michael that what Jennifer was doing was not normal or acceptable, that work spouse was a term people used to justify inappropriate relationships, and that Michael needed to give Jennifer an ultimatum. Either she establishes appropriate boundaries with David or Michael needed to seriously consider whether this marriage was salvageable. Tom pointed out that Jennifer's unwillingness to even acknowledge Michael's concerns as valid was itself a major problem, regardless of what was actually happening with David. But when Michael tried to have that conversation with Jennifer, she escalated her defensiveness to new levels. She accused Michael of trying to sabotage her career by making her uncomfortable at work. She claimed that if she distanced herself from David, it would create professional awkwardness that could harm her standing on the team. She suggested that Michael's insecurity stemmed from his own professional disappointments and that he resented her success. Each accusation was designed to shift focus from her behavior to Michael's supposed character flaws. The gaslighting was remarkably effective. Michael found himself questioning whether he was indeed being unreasonable, whether his traditional views about marriage boundaries were outdated in modern professional environments, whether he was projecting his own insecurities onto an innocent friendship. Jennifer was so confident in her assertions that the relationship with David was appropriate that Michael began to doubt his own clearly accurate perceptions. Michael started attending individual therapy to process his feelings about the situation. The therapist helped him understand that his concerns were completely valid, that emotional affairs are real and damaging, and that Jennifer's refusal to acknowledge his feelings or establish any boundaries was a serious problem regardless of what was happening with David. The therapist also helped Michael recognize that he had been engaging in a pattern of pursuing Jennifer for emotional connection, while she withdrew into her relationship with David, creating a dynamic that was destroying what remained of their intimacy. Armed with this professional validation, Michael tried once more to communicate with Jennifer about the impact her relationship with David was having on their marriage. He used I statements, focused on his feelings rather than accusations, and asked if she would be willing to attend marriage counseling with him. Jennifer agreed to go to one session, but spent the entire hour defending her relationship with David and portraying Michael as irrationally jealous. When the counselor gently suggested that Jennifer might consider establishing clearer boundaries with David to protect her marriage, Jennifer became angry and refused to return to counseling, claiming the therapist was biased against working women and did not understand modern workplace dynamics. Michael felt trapped. Every avenue he pursued to address the problem resulted in Jennifer becoming more defensive and more invested in maintaining her relationship with David at any cost. The marriage that had once felt like a partnership now felt like Michael living in the same house with someone who had checked out emotionally but wanted to maintain the structure of the family for convenience while getting her emotional needs met elsewhere. 4 months before his appearance on Steve Harvey's show, Michael made a decision that felt both necessary and devastating. He told Jennifer that he needed to see concrete changes in her relationship with David, or he was considering separation. He specified what those changes needed to look like: no more personal texting outside work hours, no more one-on-one coffee or lunch meetings, no more discussing personal issues with David, and transparency about any necessary work communication. Jennifer's response was to accuse Michael of issuing ultimatums and trying to control her life. She said that if he was so insecure that he could not handle her having friends, maybe they should separate. Her willingness to choose David over their marriage in that moment clarified everything for Michael. This was not a misunderstanding or a difference in perspective about boundaries. Jennifer had made a choice about where her emotional energy and intimacy would go, and she had chosen David over Michael. She had chosen the excitement of a new relationship over the commitment of their marriage. She had chosen to protect her connection with David over protecting her connection with Michael. Michael moved into the guest room that night. He continued living in the house and parenting their daughters, but the pretense of a real marriage was over. Jennifer seemed almost relieved by the formal separation, no longer needing to hide her constant communication with David or defend her choices to Michael. She continued her relationship with David exactly as before, while Michael grieved the loss of the marriage he thought he had. Michael's sister-in-law, Tom's wife Sarah, reached out to him during this period. She had been following his situation and wanted to offer support. Sarah suggested that Michael might benefit from getting away from Portland for a weekend, and she had secured tickets to a taping of Steve Harvey's show in Los Angeles through a colleague who worked in television. Michael initially declined, unable to imagine being around people and pretending to be entertained when his life was falling apart. But Sarah persisted, arguing that Michael needed to hear from someone with credibility and reach that his concerns about Jennifer's work husband were valid, that he was not crazy or controlling, and that he deserved better than what he was getting. Michael finally agreed, seeing the trip as a break from the constant tension at home, if nothing else. The morning of the show, he dressed in the blue shirt that had always been one of Jennifer's favorites, then realized with bitter irony that she probably would not even notice what he was wearing anymore, since all her attention was focused on David. He prepared to spend a few hours going through the motions of being part of an audience, when all he really wanted was validation that he was not losing his mind by objecting to his wife having an emotional affair. The Steve Harvey show was energetic and engaging. Exactly the kind of distraction Michael needed after months of emotional turmoil. He sat in the audience trying to focus on the segments, trying to laugh at the appropriate moments, trying to forget about Jennifer and David and the wreckage of his marriage. Then Steve announced a segment about boundaries in modern marriages, specifically addressing the concept of work spouses and whether such relationships were innocent or a form of emotional infidelity. Michael felt his heart rate accelerate as Steve described the exact dynamic he had been living with for 3 years. Steve spoke about how people justified inappropriate emotional intimacy by claiming it was just friendship, how spouses who objected to these relationships were accused of being jealous and controlling, and how destructive it was to have your partner investing their emotional energy in someone outside the marriage. When Steve asked if anyone in the audience was dealing with this exact situation, Michael found himself standing up before he had fully decided to do so. The production assistant brought Michael down to the stage, and Steve greeted him with warmth and genuine interest. Steve asked Michael to share what was happening in his marriage, and standing on that stage in front of hundreds of strangers and millions of viewers, Michael told his story. He talked about 3 years of watching his wife develop an increasingly intimate relationship with her coworker. He talked about the constant texting, the regular coffee and lunch dates, the emotional support Jennifer provided David through his divorce while having no energy left for her own marriage. He talked about being accused of jealousy and insecurity every time he raised concerns. He talked about feeling invisible in his own home while his wife's work husband received her time, attention, and emotional intimacy. When Michael finished speaking, Steve stood silent for a moment, his expression a mixture of empathy and controlled anger on Michael's behalf. When Steve finally spoke, his voice was firm and clear. "Michael, I am going to tell you something right now, and I want you to hear me clearly. You are not overreacting. You are not being jealous or controlling. You are not imagining a problem that does not exist. Your wife is having an emotional affair with her coworker, and she is gaslighting you into thinking you are the problem for recognizing what is actually happening." The audience murmured in agreement, and Steve continued with growing intensity. "Let me explain something to everyone watching. There is no such thing as a harmless work spouse. That is a term people invented to justify having inappropriate emotional intimacy with someone who is not their actual spouse. When you are married, you have one spouse. That person gets your emotional intimacy, your time, your attention, your best energy. Everyone else gets professional courtesy and appropriate friendly interactions. The minute you start calling someone your work husband or work wife, you have already crossed a boundary." Steve's voice grew stronger. "Michael, your wife is doing everything with this David that she should be doing with you. She is texting him constantly. She is meeting him regularly for intimate one-on-one time. She is sharing her thoughts and feelings with him. She is providing emotional support to him. She is dressing up to see him. She is thinking about him constantly. The only thing that makes this different from a physical affair is that they have not slept together yet. But emotionally, she has already replaced you with him." The audience was completely silent as Steve continued. "And when you tried to address this, when you expressed reasonable concerns about your wife having this kind of relationship with another man, she made you the bad guy. She accused you of being insecure. She claimed you were trying to control her. She said you did not trust her. Michael, that is called gaslighting. She took your completely valid concerns and twisted them to make you question your own perceptions. That is psychological manipulation designed to let her continue her affair without consequences." Steve paused before delivering his next point with even more force. "Let me tell you what I think about the work spouse concept. It is disrespectful. It is a betrayal of your marriage. It is a way of having the emotional benefits of an affair while maintaining plausible deniability because it is not physical, and it destroys marriages just as effectively as any physical affair because it takes the intimacy that belongs in the marriage and gives it to someone else." He turned to address the audience directly. "Ladies and gentlemen, if your spouse has a work husband or work wife, you have a problem. If they are texting someone constantly, meeting them regularly for one-on-one time, sharing personal feelings with them, Going to them for emotional support and getting defensive when you express concerns, that is an emotional affair. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. Do not let anyone make you feel crazy for recognizing what is happening right in front of you. Looking back at Michael, Steve's expression was filled with compassion mixed with steel. Here is what I think you need to do, and I want you to really hear me. Stop accepting this situation. Stop letting your wife tell you that you are overreacting when you are actually reacting to watching her have an affair. Stop living in the guest room of your own house while she continues her relationship with David without any consequences. Steve's voice intensified. You need to give your wife a clear choice. Either she ends her inappropriate relationship with David completely, establishes professional, only boundaries with him, gives you complete transparency about any necessary work communication, and commits to rebuilding your marriage through counseling, or you file for divorce. No more middle ground. No more accepting her excuses. No more being made to feel like you are the problem. She chooses you or she chooses David, but she does not get to keep both. He continued without pause. And Michael, I need you to understand something. If she chooses David, if she refuses to establish appropriate boundaries, if she continues to insist that you are the problem for objecting to her emotional affair, then you have your answer about whether this marriage can be saved. Because a person who will not protect their marriage from outside interference does not value that marriage enough to save it. Steve's next words came with particular emphasis. You also need to prepare yourself for the possibility that this relationship with David has already crossed into physical territory or will soon. I know your wife claims it is just friendship, but Michael, friends do not behave the way she is behaving with David. The level of emotional intimacy, the constant contact, the defensiveness about the relationship, the willingness to prioritize him over you, all of that suggests this has either already become physical or is heading in that direction. Do not let her convince you that emotional affairs cannot turn physical. They absolutely can and often do. Steve looked directly into Michael's eyes. I am also concerned about what message you are sending your daughters by accepting this situation. They are watching their mother have an inappropriate relationship with a man who is not their father. They are watching their father accept being treated as secondary in his own marriage. What are they learning about how men should treat women and how women should allow themselves to be treated? You need to model healthy boundaries for them, and that means not accepting a marriage where you are competing with your wife's work husband for her attention. His voice softened slightly but lost none of its conviction. Michael, I know you love your wife. I know you have invested 16 years in this marriage. I know you have daughters together and a life you built together. But that life is already gone. Your wife has checked out of your marriage emotionally and invested herself in someone else. The question is not whether you can save what you had, because what you had is already destroyed. The question is whether your wife is willing to end her affair and build something new with you, or whether she is going to keep choosing David. Steve's final advice rang through the studio. So here is what you do when you get home. You sit down with your wife and you tell her that the current situation is unacceptable and unsustainable. You tell her that you need to see immediate and concrete changes in her relationship with David, or you are filing for divorce. You tell her that work spouse is not a real thing, that emotional affairs are still affairs, and that you are not going to spend the rest of your life competing with her coworker for scraps of her attention. And then, Michael, you follow through. If she refuses to change, if she continues to gaslight you, if she chooses David over your marriage, you protect yourself and your daughters by ending a marriage that is already over in everything but name. The standing ovation lasted several minutes. Michael stood on that stage, tears streaming down his face, but feeling something he had not felt in 3 years. Validation. Relief. The certainty that his instincts had been correct all along, that he was not crazy or controlling, that work spouse was indeed a rationalization for emotional infidelity, and that he deserved better than what he had been accepting. When Michael returned to his seat, Sarah squeezed his hand and whispered that she was proud of him for finally standing up for himself. On the flight back to Portland, Michael felt different. Steve's words had given him the clarity and strength he needed to stop accepting a marriage where he was emotionally sidelined. He had spent 3 years trying to convince Jennifer that her relationship with David was inappropriate. He was done convincing. Now he would be clear about his boundaries and let Jennifer make her choice. The next evening, Michael asked Jennifer to sit down for a serious conversation. He told her he had been on Steve Harvey's show and shared their situation. Jennifer immediately became defensive, angry that he had made their private issues public. But Michael remained calm, repeating what Steve had said about work spouses being a rationalization for emotional affairs and about the need for clear boundaries to protect marriages. Michael delivered his ultimatum with a steadiness that surprised him. Jennifer needed to end her inappropriate relationship with David immediately, establish professional-only boundaries, provide complete transparency about work communication, and commit to intensive marriage counseling. If she was unwilling to do those things, Michael would file for divorce. He told her he would give her 1 week to decide, but that the current situation was over regardless of what she chose. Jennifer's initial response was anger and dismissal. She claimed Michael was being manipulated by television entertainment, that Steve Harvey did not know the details of their situation, that she had done nothing wrong. But when Michael remained firm, explaining that he would rather be divorced than continue living as a secondary character in his own marriage, something shifted in Jennifer's demeanor. For the first time in 3 years, Jennifer seemed to actually hear what Michael was saying. She asked him how he had felt during the past few years, and Michael told her honestly. He described feeling invisible, replaced, and constantly rejected in favor of David. He explained that watching her invest all her emotional energy in another man while claiming Michael was overreacting had been the most painful experience of his life. He told her that whether or not the relationship with David was physical, the emotional intimacy she shared with him had hollowed out their marriage and left Michael with nothing. Jennifer was quiet for a long time before speaking. She admitted that her relationship with David had probably crossed boundaries she would not have accepted if Michael had similar relationships with female colleagues. She acknowledged that the constant texting and regular meetings were excessive, and that she had been defensive because on some level she knew the relationship was inappropriate but did not want to admit it. She said she would think about what Michael had said. 3 days later, Jennifer told Michael she had decided to make changes. She had spoken with David and explained that their relationship needed to be strictly professional going forward. She had stopped all personal texting and canceled their standing coffee meetings. She had committed to marriage counseling with Michael. She admitted that she had been wrong to dismiss his concerns and that she understood now how much damage she had caused. Michael was cautiously hopeful, but made clear that he would need to see sustained changes over time, not just temporary adjustments to pacify him. Jennifer understood, acknowledging that she had broken his trust and would need to rebuild it through consistent actions rather than words. 1 month after Michael's appearance on Steve Harvey's show, the producers reached out about doing a follow-up segment. Michael and Jennifer agreed, both wanting to share that they were working to rebuild their marriage after the wake-up call Steve had provided. When they walked onto Steve's stage together, the change in their dynamic was visible. Jennifer sat close to Michael, holding his hand, clearly present in a way she had not been in years. Steve asked for an update and Jennifer spoke first, thanking Steve for being direct with Michael about the inappropriateness of her relationship with David. She admitted that she had been in denial about how her work-spouse dynamic was destroying her marriage and that Steve's words had forced her to confront what she had been avoiding. Jennifer explained that she had ended all personal contact with David and that while they still worked on the same team, their interactions were now strictly professional. She described how difficult it had been to acknowledge that she had been having an emotional affair while claiming it was innocent friendship. She told the audience that giving up her relationship with David had felt like a loss at first, which proved how inappropriate the relationship had been. If it was truly just a work friendship, ending the personal components would not have been painful. Michael shared that the past month had been challenging but promising, Jennifer was making genuine efforts to reinvest in their marriage, to be present with him and their daughters, to rebuild the emotional intimacy they had lost. He acknowledged that trust would take time to rebuild, but that he finally felt like he had his wife back instead of competing with her work husband for her attention. Steve nodded with obvious satisfaction. "This is what I wanted to see. Jennifer, I am proud of you for acknowledging that your relationship with David crossed boundaries and for making real changes. That takes courage and integrity. And Michael, I am proud of you for standing up for yourself and your marriage instead of continuing to accept being second place in your own home." Over the following year, Michael and Jennifer's transformation continued. The marriage counseling helped them address not just the affair with David, but deeper communication issues that had allowed the situation to develop. Jennifer came to understand that her defensiveness, when Michael raised concerns, had been a form of protecting her affair rather than protecting herself from false accusations. Michael learned that he had been conflict avoidant earlier in their marriage, not addressing small boundary violations until they became a major crisis. They also had difficult conversations with their daughters about what had happened and what they had learned. Jennifer apologized to the girls for modeling inappropriate boundaries and for being emotionally unavailable while she was invested in her relationship with David. Michael explained that sometimes adults make mistakes, but that admitting those mistakes and working to fix them was more important than pretending everything had always been fine. 2 years after Michael's first appearance on Steve Harvey's show, he and Jennifer were invited back for a final update. By then, their marriage had been fundamentally rebuilt on a foundation of clear boundaries and mutual prioritization. Jennifer had changed jobs, partly to remove herself from daily interaction with David, but also because she had realized the culture at her previous company normalized work-spouse dynamics that were destructive to marriages. During that final appearance, Steve asked Jennifer what she would tell other people who claimed to have harmless work spouses. Jennifer looked directly into the camera and spoke with conviction. "I would tell them that work spouse is a term that allows you to have an emotional affair while pretending it is innocent. I would tell them that if they are investing significant emotional energy in someone who is not their actual spouse, they are taking something away from their marriage whether they admit it or not. I would tell them that their partner's concerns are probably valid, even if they do not want to hear them. And I would tell them that losing my relationship with David was nothing compared to what I almost lost when I nearly destroyed my marriage by prioritizing him over my husband." Michael added his own perspective, speaking to others who felt they were competing with work spouses for their partner's attention. "Trust your instincts. If you feel like you are being replaced, you probably are. Do not let anyone gaslight you into thinking you are overreacting when you express reasonable concerns about your spouse having inappropriate emotional intimacy with someone else. And demand real changes, not just promises and excuses. You deserve to be your spouse's priority, not their backup plan while they invest in someone else." Steve addressed the audience with words that would be shared widely across social media in the following days. "This is my message to everyone watching. There is no such thing as a harmless work spouse. That relationship is either inappropriate or the term would not apply. If you are calling someone your work husband or work wife, you have crossed a boundary. If your spouse has a work spouse, you need to address it immediately and directly. And if they refuse to establish appropriate boundaries, you need to decide whether you are willing to spend your life competing with their coworker for their attention." Michael and Jennifer's story became one of the most discussed segments in Steve Harvey's show history. It sparked national conversations about emotional affairs, about what constitutes cheating in modern marriages, and about the work spouse phenomenon that had been normalized in many professional environments. The segment was shared in marriage counseling sessions, discussed in workplace ethics training, and referenced in countless conversations about boundaries in relationships. But the most meaningful impact was on individual marriages where one partner had a work spouse and the other partner had been gaslit into thinking their concerns were unreasonable. Thousands of people reached out to share that Michael and Jennifer's story had given them permission to address situations they had been told to accept, and that Steve's clear explanation of why work spouses are inappropriate had validated their instincts about relationships their partners claimed were innocent. 5 years after that first appearance on Steve Harvey's show, Michael and Jennifer had fully rebuilt their marriage into something stronger than it had been before the crisis. They had learned to communicate more directly, to address concerns before they became crises, and to prioritize their relationship above all other connections. They spoke regularly at marriage retreats and church groups about their experience, helping other couples understand the dangers of emotional affairs and the importance of clear boundaries. Jennifer often reflected that her relationship with David had felt exciting and validating in the moment, but had nearly cost her everything that actually mattered. She had been so focused on the emotional high of the new connection that she had failed to recognize she was destroying the foundation of her family until Michael gave her an ultimatum. She credited Steve Harvey's direct words with breaking through her denial and making her face what she had been avoiding. Michael still thought about those moments on Steve Harvey's stage when he finally heard someone validate that his concerns were not only reasonable but essential to protecting his marriage. For 3 years he had been told he was overreacting, controlling, jealous, and insecure. Steve had looked him in the eye and told him he was right to object to his wife having an emotional affair, right to demand boundaries, right to refuse to accept being replaced in his own marriage. That validation had given Michael the strength to deliver the ultimatum that ultimately saved his marriage. If this story resonates with you, if you or someone you know is dealing with a spouse who has a work husband or work wife, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Share this story with someone who might need to hear it, because sometimes the most important lesson we can learn is that work spouse is a rationalization for emotional infidelity, that emotional intimacy belongs inside your marriage rather than outside it, and that protecting your relationship sometimes means demanding that your spouse choose between you and the person who is taking your place. Michael Bradford proved that trusting your instincts about inappropriate relationships is wisdom rather than jealousy, that demanding boundaries is self-respect rather than control, and that you do not have to accept being secondary in your own marriage. Remember that you deserve a spouse who prioritizes you above all others, who reserves their emotional intimacy for you alone, and who protects your marriage by maintaining appropriate boundaries with everyone else.